My name is Ellen Steeren Mavec, and I am the president of the Kelvin and Eleanor Smith Foundation. I have been one very fortunate woman to have been born into a very philanthropic family in Cleveland, and University Circle especially has played a major role in our family. My grandfather's father was a professor of chemistry at Case Western Reserve University, and so my grandfather and his two brothers spent a lot of time, in the University Circle and certainly over at the university. And their house is still in existence on Bellflower, and the house that they grew up in is the house that's a fraternity home right in front of L'Albatros restaurant. So if you know L'Albatros restaurant, that restaurant was my great-grandparents' garage. They were one of the first people in the community to have an electric car, and they also had their horses there. So when you go into the restaurant, you can see the sculpture of the horses up on the sides of the house. So anyway, it was their carriage house, which now, of course, it's a fabulous restaurant. My grandfather, Kelvin Smith, with his two brothers, spent a lot of time in University Circle with their family, and certainly my great-grandfather started the first chemical engineering degree in America, one of the very first, and so my grandfather was a chemical engineer, my uncle was an engineer, and so it was all kind of runs in the family with this history of being in University Circle, and certainly with Case Western Reserve University. So my great-grandfather got to know the Dow family well, that started Dow Chemical. They all worked together. And then my grandfather, Kelvin Smith, started the Lubrizol company with his two brothers. They kept their love of Case Western Reserve University and University Circle in everything that they did. So when Lubrizol became quite a successful company, they continued to remember what their father always taught them, which was to love your environment, to love education. And I have a great quote that I use often. My grandfather shared his father's conviction that education is crucial for our country, for success in business, and for the dignity and growth of individuals. And that kind of has always been the line that has kept the foundation that I am president of, that is named after my grandfather, Kelvin, and his wife, Eleanor. Education was very important to the Smith family. The environment was very important to the Smith culture. All the areas that the Kelvin and Eleanor Smith Foundation now support. So anyway, back up. Kelvin Smith with his two brothers started Lubrizol, became a very successful company, certainly during World War II. And in 1955, he and his wife Eleanor decided to create a foundation in their name here in Cleveland that would support education for students that were unable to pay for education, and endowments for teaching, and areas that the foundation trustees at the time thought were important. My grandmother was very involved with the environment as well. She loved gardens and was very interested in the Botanic Garden, used to be the Garden Center. She was very active with the Society for the Blind, now the Cleveland Sight Center, and that was kind of her two favorite areas that she loved. My grandfather was a fantastic collector of Japanese and Asian art, mainly because of his love of Sherman Lee at the Art Museum. He traveled quite a bit with Sherman Lee and collected areas that Sherman had hoped would end up, that his collection would end up at the museum, which in fact it did. and Sherman Lee was very good with a number of Cleveland families and getting families excited about areas to collect in, and then with the hopes that it would be given to the museum. My grandfather was also still very involved with the university and university hospitals and the Cleveland Clinic and all the different organizations that are now housed in University Circle. So the Kelvin and Eleanor Smith Foundation was started with the idea that his values of the families would continue on. But interestingly, talking about women in philanthropy, when he started the foundation, he had two daughters, my mother, Cara, and her sister, Lucia, and they were not invited to be on the board. He was on the board, and his two lawyers were on the board, which was very typical of the time. But I know that my grandmother certainly directed him quietly as she could, to where areas that she felt were important. And with the foundation being run by him and his lawyer cronies, she was able to have her love of organizations be included as well. So the foundation started because my grandfather and his brothers really began to endow professorships at Case. They built a beautiful engineering building, chemical engineering building, and it just became important for them to have the ability to have a foundation to continue to support those areas that they wanted to. So the mission of the Kelvin and Eleanor Smith Foundation is that we support nonprofit organizations that adhere to excellence in their mission, creativity in approach, fiscal responsibility, and who provide leadership in their service to the community, which ultimately makes a positive impact. So we give in the areas of arts and culture, economic development, education, environment, and health and human services. So basically, across the board, all in Northeast Ohio. And about 15 years ago, we, the foundation, of course, moved from my grandparents, and then my mother and aunt became part of the foundation and directed with other board members the monies of the foundation. And then I came as the only other family member living in Cleveland, unfortunately still to this day, became a member of the board. So we give to the Northeast Ohio, but specifically as large gifts to University Circle to follow that tradition of Kelvin Smith and their love of this area, the Smith family. On the foundation itself, in that it was solely funded by gifts and estates of my grandparents. The foundation in 1956 had assets of almost $29,000. In the same year, $340 was awarded in grants. After my grandfather's death, the foundation assets increased to $28 million. And today, we are valued at over $150 million, and we give between $7 and $8 million a year to Northeast Ohio organizations. So you can see it's grown exponentially, and we have a great investment committee and wonderful investment managers. The Board of Trustees currently are 7 members. I am the only family member left. My mother and my aunt are honorary trustees. They're now not able to come to the meetings. And then we have 6 other members who are not family members, but all people that have the same values that the Smith family has, which is to help those in need, to create beautiful areas, and the dignity and responsibility and commitment to truth and education and values and all the things that were important. So we have 3 meetings a year, and we have 2 staff people. So it's a full-time job and a wonderful opportunity for me to be able to continue the tradition. Foundations, you need to apply with a grant, and we give to operating, which is unusual. Not many foundations will give to general operating to help with day-to-day activities. We give to capital buildings, and we give to special grants of something interesting that an organization needs to accomplish. We do not give to endowment, so we do not give to a organization's endowment. It was my grandfather's belief that our investment managers were better than the nonprofit's investment managers, which I think was true at the time. I don't know now, because all these institutions have grown so exponentially, and they of course have great investment managers as well. But that's how the regulation stands. So so we generally get involved with an organization by having them approach us. We go and visit and spend time with the directors, the people in see the institution, and then we invite them to send a grant, usually for operating, and we work with them with a number of years to see, you know, how they're doing with making sure that they're following their mission and doing all the things that they're supposed to be doing. And then after we've been involved with them for a while, if there is a big special grant or a capital grant, we will consider those. Our largest grants that we have made certainly has been to the Case Western Reserve University and to the Cleveland Museum of Art. $25 million to the Art Museum, and I think we're up to $21 million to the university. We've given $9 million to musical arts, that's the orchestra, and these are just capital dollars. These are not operating dollars. We've given to the Cleveland Botanical Garden, $7 million. $4 million to the Cleveland Institute of Art. So honestly, since 1956, when all of this when the foundation started, to today, we're close to $100 million that has been given to University Circle. So it's very exciting. So I was involved with the Cleveland Museum of Art when they started their capital campaign to redo their entire building, and I was one of the co-chairs for that first phase of the campaign. Got to help pick the architect and be very involved with the whole organizing of how that campaign would work, and then being the person with head of the development committee to raise the monies. And of course it started at $245 million and now it's up to $350. But it was a very interesting time to see how philanthropy has changed, because we were able to raise wonderful, large gifts in the naming of the galleries and the wings. And of course, years ago, certainly when my grandfather was giving in his money specifically himself, never did they put their name on anything. They didn't want anybody to know. It was all very private. And that's just the way it was then. Today, of course, people want their names on buildings, and the institutions want to be able to use the names to show other possible funders that they are able to, you know, get significant dollars from these particular families or foundations. So it's an interesting change. When it used to be very quiet and private, now it's not that way at all. But it helps selling galleries and parts of buildings. So anyway, we've been very involved in, we helped build the Calvin Smith Library that we're sitting in. We've helped with the Smith Lobby at Musical Arts, Severance Hall next door. We've given significant dollars to the Veal University Center that's going up right now. We've given significant dollars to the Art Museum for their special exhibitions area, and the Japanese Gallery, certainly in honor of my grandparents. And you know, when you walk around, really, University Circle, we've touched just about every institution, as long as they are following the mission, their mission, and we're following our mission. With the library, the Calvin Smith Library, my Aunt Lucia Nash was still very involved with the university, and she helped a lot with choosing the architect for this building and creating atmospheres that she felt were important for a library. And this was, when it was built, the most technological library in the country. So she was learning how to build buildings that were forward-thinking, but she also wanted it to be user-friendly and comfortable and elegant for the students. So there was a bit of the past and the new with this building. So it just depends on an institution how much they would like for me to get involved, or the foundation, and usually they invite me too if they're hoping that they're going to get big dollars. And so with the Eleanor Armstrong Smith Glass House, I was very involved with the Botanic Garden to help make that glass house the best it could be. We traveled around the country looking at glass houses and helped. They had chose the architect, but we were able to tweak areas that we felt were important. So yes, I can get as involved as a university or the institutions want me to be. And we like to do that. We generally don't come in with major gifts after the fact. So.
As you describe it, your foundation may have the most impact on the circle.
Well, I wouldn't say our foundation. I would say that the Smith family has probably had one of the largest impacts in University Circle, starting with my great-grandparents, and starting with Case, because my uncle, Kent Smith, also had a foundation, as did my uncle, Vincent Smith. He also had a foundation. So all three brothers that started Lubrizol together had foundations, and they all had separate boards, and they all did their own separate giving. So my great uncle Kent Smith never wanted his name on his foundation, so it was called the 1525 Foundation at the time, and that was the address of the law firm that helped him put the foundation together. That foundation has now closed down into the Kent Smith Trust. He did not have any children, and so that trust is actually spending out. I have a trustee on my board who is also a trustee on the Kent Smith board. The Vincent Smith board, I think as well, I think that Vincent Smith Foundation or trust is spent out. So the Calvin and Eleanor Smith Foundation really is the only one that isn't spent out, because we still have family here. Not many of us, but we still have family here. So I would say, yes, that the Smith family, certainly 3 generations, has probably been the largest supporter of University Circle. And that doesn't mean that we don't, we also support Playhouse Square. There's other areas in the city in Northeast Ohio that we support as well. But the biggest significance has been in University Circle. And there really isn't any other place in America like University Circle. And we figured that out, as I said, a number of years ago. And we really started to give major dollars to University Circle so it would start to build and thrive. And what you see today is the result of many people finally jumping on board and saying, this is something very important to Cleveland, and this is what makes us very special. So it's a wonderful treat to see what has been created, not only in the buildings, but also in the area of directorships. We have some fantastic directors now running these wonderful institutions. We have the RTA on board that fixed up Euclid Avenue and has brought the health line along and is fixing up the rapid transit, so we have a more beautiful rapid transit. I mean, everybody's getting on board, foundations, companies, individuals, to make sure that University Circle gets better and better as we speak. So it's very exciting. The whole uptown, that's been all brand new and significant, and now the big push, of course, is housing. We want housing in University Circle, so we have more people living here. It used to be you went to work here and you got out of town in a big hurry, and that's changing. The young people today are moving back to Cleveland. They're living downtown. They're living in University Circle, and they understand how incredibly impressive this area is, not only with its new buildings. We have some of the best architects in the world shown here, but also with the history and the values of the people that started it. Institutions change, and with their leadership, they change, and their missions change. And so we're careful on that. We follow the organizations that my grandparents were interested in, certainly that my aunt and my mother were interested in, and things that our current board are interested in. But if there are institutions that no longer are in existence or are no longer at the top of their game, or institutions we just don't feel are viable anymore, then we stop, or we sometimes pause giving. And I would say that certainly, in 1956, I don't believe my grandfather ever could have believed that the endowment would be the dollars that it is today, which is a whole big responsibility to make sure that those dollars are given out well and right. And I'm sure he probably would never have guessed we'd be building buildings. So, but certainly the values are still there. The values of the family are in the foundation at all times. What would Kelvin have thought about that? And as an entrepreneur and a scientist, and all of the areas that he loved that are part of our family, when we ask that question, what would Kelvin have thought?